Hello, I'm Teon Edwards from the Educational Gaming Environments Group, EdGE, at TERC, a not-for-profit STEM education research and development company here in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
And we want to welcome you all to STEMlandia, our view of AR and how it might fit into education, in particular STEM education. My name is Jamie Larsen. I work with Teon on some of our projects. We want to start by giving you a little background on where we come from in education and try and put that into some context in terms of where we think AR is going and how it's going to fit in. And I need to go way back to this thing that was thrown on my desk as a graduate student by my major professor, where he said, "This just came out. It's really cool. I think we can use it. Figure out what we can do with it." So I played Lemonade Stand for about 2 weeks and other games that were available at the time. And then I kind of got down to business.
Well, I'm just a little bit younger than Jamie, and my first ed tech experience came along while I was designing this curriculum global lab, in which students from all around the world collect environmental data and then use this newfangled thing called the World Wide Web, you might have heard of it, to be sharing data with each other.
So from that humble beginning, I was labeled as an educational technologist. I went into the classroom. I was in the classroom for many years. And I've seen lots of promises, lots of technology, educational technology come and go. This is a technology that I worked with. I actually created a video disc, a laser disc for Nike back in the day. When I went into the classroom, this was something that was going to change the world of education. It was going to be something that made the classroom so interactive and so amazing that it would possibly do away with teachers. Well, Laserdisc didn't sort of survive. It morphed into something else. But the lesson from that to me was, if you create educational technology, don't use it in the same way you used to do things. Oftentimes it was not much better than a textbook. It just allowed you to jump quicker from one video to another.
Another way that technology in education doesn't fulfill its promises is when there's a mismatch between the expectations for the technology and where the students and the schools and the teachers are. So for example, my very first professional development course, I never got around to teaching the technology. Why? I spent the entire time teaching those teachers how to double-click. We've obviously moved a long way from that. But still, the fact remains that if we're trying to think about how to bring AR into education, we need to be thinking about meeting the teachers where they are and giving them the professional development that they need to get to where they want to go.
So some educational technology is actually sticky and transformative. And this is an example of an educational technology that was pioneered by some folks at TERC in the early days, Bob Tinker in particular. And it's probeware that became microcomputer-based laboratories that went into the classroom that literally transformed physics education. It turned it from chalk talk to a hands-on experience where kids could actually collect data in the classroom and make sense of that data. And it brought a lot more kids into education, brought a lot more kids into physics education in particular, and spread out to other components of the learning environment. And it's been around for a long time, and it's got a stickiness that's transformative.
Yes, so probeware, that curriculum I mentioned a couple slides ago, it used probeware. And now, multiple decades later, Jamie and I are still designing programs that use probes. For example, the one you see here, Sports Lab, it engages students in working in their own sports research lab to design their own parkour shoes. So one of the things that influences my view of AR and my view of education, and in particular educational technology, which is some advice that I got along the way as an educator. I met this guy, Freeman Dyson, who I think was teaching some kind of class at Princeton at a conference, and I asked him as a young teacher, what can I do so that my students, by the time they get to you, are ready and can be successful? And he said, without missing a beat, open the door and let them out. I also read some works by Gary Paul Nabhan, who did a lot of work with Native Americans in the Southwest, and he talked about how Native American kids knew more about endangered species all over the world than they did about the plants and the animals outside their door. They basically had lost their culture because of media that had taken them away from understanding the ethnobotanical connections with their society. And then lastly, most recently, I've been influenced by Richard Louv, who wrote a book called Last Child in the Woods. And he coined the phrase nature deficit disorder that looks at how technology actually can disconnect us by keeping us from going outside and learning from the world outside our door. And those things, especially Louv's work, has got me excited to think about how technology can be used, in particular AR, to reconnect kids with nature.
So Jamie talks about outdoors and nature. I talk about the world and even the universe. Science is all about understanding the world around us, and yet that often gets lost. In science education, we spend more time on facts than actually looking at the world around us. And that same worry carries over to AR for me. So my advice to you is that as you're thinking about your augmented reality, don't forget the reality.
So I was faced with how to use technology and augmented reality in particular to capture this augmented reality moment when I was younger, when I went out and started using a magnifying glass to augment my reality, look closer at nature, to connect with nature, to ask questions that I wanted answered. How could I use this to get kids outside? How could I use it as a lever to open that door and reduce the time spent playing games inside and spend more time outside understanding the world? From that, we became our first AR project, the Nature's Apprentice geocaching adventure, where we used a tool. It was a proprietary tool from Groundspeak, a geocaching company in Seattle, Washington, where we created a series of 10 geolocated, what we called STEM caches around the Arnold Arboretum of Harvard University, where people could use a browser-based app to go out and find plants and locations and learn some of the STEM content behind those locations. There was also a puzzle associated with each that was tied into that content, so there was a gaming aspect to it where they had to answer a question to get credit for finding that geocache. So the path ahead for us, we did that original project in 2014. We've done a couple of other pilot projects to sort of inform us where we go. We're actually waiting to hear from some funding that we've applied for here. But out of that, we've defined a methodology that we can use to work with middle school and high school kids. The original Nature's Apprentice project we built. Our interest, you may have heard lots of people, several people around here talking about it, about shifting the focus to kids or the importance of storytelling. We wanted to take the creation of these Nature's Apprentice adventures out of our hands to create STEM stories and put it into the hands of kids. So we've defined a sequence of things that we're going to work with kids on to get them to build new STEMlandia stories and adventures. The first thing they do is they build a community asset map. Who are the people? Where are the places? What are the things in their local environment that could make for an engaging STEM story that they could create a mobile app and share with others? The next step is to identify a story that's worth telling. If you live along the Colorado River, this is actually the Colorado River down in Yuma, Arizona, one of the schools that we're hoping to work with that signed up to work with us. You might tell a story of ethnobiology or ethnobotany along there. You might tell a story from the perspective of the Hispanic kids that moved there because of the migrant labor that was tied to agriculture in the area. You might tell a story about the dams that have built along the river and how that's changed the flow of the river. From all of those stories, we'll have teams of kids that will identify narrative with hooks that are located in 5 to 10 places along the river that the app can take people to those places and they can learn about some of the STEM content tied to that location. They then create assets that can be used with an authoring tool. And then along the way, we use the design thinking process, an iterative process, where they create a mobile version of their adventure. They test it and come up with a version that they can then feel confident that when they launch it, it will work, and then they can launch it and they can share it with the community in a way that they choose. It might be a set of middle school kids or high school kids that have created a STEMlandia, a STEM story adventure that they can share with younger kids. It might be something they share with the entire school community, or it might be something that they feel so strongly about they share as an exhibition of their understanding and their learning related to how you can learn about STEM concepts in nature.
So the authentic immersive experience is really, really important for science education, but it's actually often hard to achieve. For example, how many of us have ever even been on an archaeological dig site, let alone participated in the science at one? Luckily, the digital, especially VR and AR, are really good at this, if we do it right. A number of years ago, EdGE designed and researched a science-based game called Martian Boneyards. It was set in an HD virtual world called Blue Mars that was claiming that it was going to be the next Second Life. In that game, players were immersed in a story, a narrative-based mystery game. Bones were found scattered around an old science center, and players were asked to go around and figure out what had happened to get those bones there and why. To do this, players wandered around as avatars through a digital world with a digital PDA, finding and scanning digital bones. It was a very immersive and fun, beautiful experience, but as you can tell, it was all digital. With one really key element. We didn't deliver very much science content in this game, but the things that they were scanning, those bones and other artifacts, were authentic. They were real. They were based on 3D scans, and we encouraged players to go out into the real world, or at least the internet, to be finding information on them. Nothing in the game was telling the players whether they were right or wrong with what they were figuring out. We relied on the community to be doing that. And indeed, over the course of playing the game, the players, none of whom were particularly science-interested people, and all of whom were playing this game in their free choice time, just for fun, they were managed to figure out the science and solve the mystery. So that was all digital. What does a game like that look like with AR? What does it take to be putting authentic AR bones around a park or a schoolyard? And what does it take to be wrapping that in a mystery story so that people want to go out and explore? The AR adds a vital layer to the experience, but it's a layer that isn't the entire experience.
So where are we headed? In terms of the Nature's Apprentice project, the AR STEM stories we talked about earlier, we see creating more of those AR STEM stories driven by STEM cache puzzles, but as I said, we want to shift the content creation, make children the creators, not just the consumers. We're also working on a project we're starting to pilot where we're using images that are taken by the space station astronauts that are shared on a place called Windows on Earth, which is one of TERC's projects, that we're taking these images, like this image of Seattle, and working with educators and schools and informal education sites to try and identify ground-based sites where kids can tell AR or VR stories, annotated stories using products like ThingLink to tell a story that can be shared with others. The one down here in the lower right is tied to a location where we're working with Aspect Consulting in Seattle that's actually monitoring, has placed a series of wells in an area where they're proposed to build some new apartments, and they're looking at the groundwater and monitoring some of the contaminants in that area. They're doing an outreach to kids in the neighborhood so that those kids can see what some of the STEM content and concepts that these scientists are dealing with, but also get introduced to some STEM careers and some role models in that area as they create an annotated version of that that they can share with other people in their neighborhood.
EdGE also is paying attention to more focused science-based games. For example, games that have students dwell in physics concepts or other science concepts. And we're trying to figure out what research can tell us about what AR does and doesn't do well. Not in the sense of what technologically AR can do, but in terms of what the power of this technology is for transforming learning, as well as where it might make learning harder. And EdGE's current research has been focusing on tacit or implicit learning within games. What are students learning as they play games that they can't actually articulate? And what's the role of the educator or the teacher in bridging between that game-based learning and the more formal learning of the classroom? We're currently seeking funding to be tracing this research into the AR domain.
So we wanted to leave you with a couple of thoughts before we go, and one of them is based upon something that John asked me at the AR in Action conference in New York. He asked me, what is going to be the lens through which AR is delivered? Is it going to be the phone like we use with our STEM stories and other projects? Is it going to be goggles? Is it going to be meta lenses? Is it going to be a contact? And the best I could come up with, the more I thought about it, I thought about these self-driving cars, these autonomous cars that are coming down the road. And I asked myself the question, what do you do while you're waiting for your self-driving car to arrive? If I'm taking my kids from Phoenix, Arizona up to the Grand Canyon, what do? I've got this car that can be augmented so that the windows, as Google calls them, I think magic windows, can tell me a story that I want my kids to learn about what was the Colorado Plateau like in the past. So I could turn my self-driving car into a time machine so I can see what it looked like. So by the time I get to the Grand Canyon, I can start unpacking the different layers that I see at the canyon. And along the way, by the way, I might stop because my car knows that I like to run, and I can stop at a place that the car identifies that there's an adventure run that somebody from Nike might have programmed. I can strap on my free AR shoes. I can put on my shirt that will monitor my body heart rate and my lactic acid content, and I can go out for an adventure run, exercise my evolutionary heritage as a persistence runner, and I can be involved with my solo glasses that lets me run from predators so that I can get my interval training in, all the while getting a heads-up feedback.
So, a final note, don't forget the stairs. As you're designing and thinking about the future of AR technology, don't forget that there sometimes may be other, sometimes better solutions.
So I'd like to, both Teon and I would like to welcome you to our view of STEMlandia and kind of encourage the power in this audience to think outside. How can we take AR outside? There's lots of demos around here, cutting edge technology. A lot of it focuses on the inside. But we really think strongly that you have to think about opening the door. How can we take it outside to reconnect kids with nature?
And we see the real potential for AR in education. We can just taste it. But we also have cautionary messages. And what we want to do is we're looking for people who want to work with us to be thinking about when and how to really be using this technology, how to be leveraging it to make it the best teaching and education tool it can be, and how to be making it sticky for the classroom so that it's still there and still being impactful and still helping kids for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you.